At 3 o'clock on the morning of February 9th, 1945, Master Sergeant William Owens crouched beneath the number 3 engine of a B-29 Superfortress named Gravel Gertie on the coral hardstand at Tinian Island. Oil dripped steadily from a loose fitting, each drop ticking onto the metal cowling below, a small leak that could kill 11 men 4 hours from now. Owens was 31 years old. He had been Gravel Gertie's crew chief for 7 months. 0 mechanical aborts. That alone made him an outlier. Since January, 11 B-29s on Tinian had burned on the ground or turned back early with engine failures. At any given time, nearly half the bomber fleet was grounded. The Wright R-3350 engines that powered the Superfortress failed so often that the onboard fire suppression systems successfully extinguished fires only 13% of the time. The B-29 was supposed to be the aircraft that ended the war. Pressurized cabins, remote-controlled gun turrets. 4 Wright R-3350 duplex Cyclone engines producing 2,200 horsepower each. On paper, it was the most advanced bomber ever built. In reality, its engines were death traps. The R-3350 packed 18 cylinders into 2 rows, and the rear cylinders ran dangerously hot. Exhaust manifolds developed invisible hot spots. Oil fittings vibrated loose under sustained power. Magnesium components ignited and burned at temperatures that fire extinguishers couldn't touch. Upper cylinders required replacement every 25 flight hours. Entire engines rarely survived more than 75 hours before catastrophic failure. General Curtis LeMay called it the buggiest damn airplane that ever came down the pike. For mechanics on Tinian, conditions made everything worse. Temperatures hovered near 100 degrees. Humidity stayed above 80%. Coral dust coated every tool, every bearing, every open engine. There were no hangars, no shade. Maintenance happened in the open, on white coral that reflected heat back into their faces. When a bomber returned from Japan, ground crews had 12 hours to inspect the entire aircraft, repair battle damage, replace failed components, refuel, rearm, and prepare it for the next mission. Most couldn't do it. Between December 1944 and February 1945, the 6th Bomb Group lost 14 B-29s to engine fires. Not enemy fighters. Not flak. Engine fires. 5 burned on takeoff. 9 caught fire over Japan. 154 airmen died, killed by their own engines. Owens knew the numbers. He'd helped pull bodies from wreckage. He'd watched burning Superfortresses cartwheel into the Pacific. So he ignored the manual. Every morning at 4 o'clock, 2 hours before anyone else, Owens ran his own inspection routine. Not the standard checklist. His checklist. He torqued every oil fitting twice. Inspected exhaust manifolds for the faintest heat discoloration. Monitored cylinder head temperatures during extended ground runs. Pressure tested fire suppression lines by hand. He replaced spark plugs every mission, not every 5 missions like the manual allowed. Other mechanics thought he was insane, burning out his crew, over-engineering simple work. But Gravel Gertie never failed. 22 combat missions. Tokyo, Nagoya, Osaka, Kobe. Not one mechanical abort. Not one early return. Not one engine fire. While bombers around her burned or turned back, Gravel Gertie flew every scheduled raid. Command wanted to know why. On March 14th, Owens found the answer to that question, and the problem that would end his career if anyone found out. Gravel Gertie sat loaded with incendiaries. Target, Osaka. Launch in 6 hours. Owens spotted a hairline crack in the number 3 engine's exhaust manifold, 3 inches long, running along the weld where the exhaust pipe met the cylinder head. Standard procedure was clear: replace the manifold. 8 hours minimum. Missed the mission. But Owens had seen this exact crack before. 6 weeks earlier, another B-29 had climbed out over the Pacific when the manifold failed. Superheated exhaust sprayed directly onto fuel lines. Flames erupted within seconds. 40 seconds later, the wing tanks ignited. The crew had 90 seconds to bail out. 3 didn't make it. The bomber exploded at 18,000 feet. Wreckage fell for 3 minutes, scattering across 8 miles of ocean. Owens stared at the crack and made a decision that command would never approve. The book solution was simple: remove the cowling, unbolt the manifold, replace it, reconnect everything. But Owens didn't have 8 hours. He had 6. and he had a method no manual had ever authorized. A full engine change required a test run. 8 hours if everything went perfectly, 12 if they found additional problems. And they always found additional problems. Owens didn't have 8 hours. The mission briefing was scheduled for 9 o'clock. Engine start at 11:30. Takeoff at noon. If Gravel Gertie wasn't ready, another crew would take her place. Or worse, the mission would launch one bomber short. Either way, his perfect record would end. Owens stayed crouched beneath the number 3 engine, flashlight clenched between his teeth, magnifying glass steady in his left hand. He studied the crack inch by inch, measuring its length, checking the surrounding metal for spiderweb stress fractures. The crack hadn't grown since his last inspection 3 days earlier. That mattered. It meant the weld was still holding, for now. The question wasn't whether it was safe on the ground. The question was whether it would survive 15 more hours. Engine start, full power takeoff, climb to altitude, long cruise at high manifold pressure, the bombing run over Osaka, then the long flight home. Other crew chiefs would have grounded the aircraft immediately, pulled the manifold, filed the paperwork, let the mission go without them. Owens didn't work that way. 7 months of keeping Gravel Gertie flying had taught him something the manuals hadn't. Most failures weren't sudden. They were predictable, and predictable problems could be managed if you understood the stress. He opened his tool bag. Inside was a roll of stainless steel safety wire, 0.041 inches thick, the same wire used throughout the aircraft to secure critical fasteners. It wasn't meant for structural reinforcement. Owens used it anyway. He'd figured it out after watching his third B-29 burn on the hardstand. Engines didn't fail because of cracks. They failed because cracks concentrated stress in one place until metal tore itself apart, spread the stress, and the failure slowed, sometimes long enough to finish a mission. Owens wrapped the wire tightly around the exhaust manifold. One loop, then another, then a third. Each turn cinched hard against the metal, compressing the cracked weld, reinforcing it like a steel bandage. The wire redistributed vibration and heat across the entire section instead of letting it focus on the weakest point. It violated 3 technical orders. It wasn't approved by right engineers. And it worked. Owens had used this method 11 times before. 11 cracked manifolds. 11 missions completed without failure. But this crack was different. Longer. Deeper. Positioned exactly where heat and vibration peaked during climb. If the wire failed, the manifold would rupture. If the manifold ruptured, superheated exhaust would spray directly onto fuel lines. If that happened over Japan, the aircraft would burn, and 11 men would die. Owens finished wrapping the wire at 4:15, 30 minutes before the rest of his crew arrived. 30 minutes to decide whether to sign the aircraft as mission ready or ground it. If he signed off, he was betting 11 lives on a piece of wire. If he grounded the aircraft, command would want to know why. And once they asked that question, they'd start asking others. About the previous repairs. About the other times he'd done this. Owens tested the wire with both hands, pulling hard. No movement. No slack. The wire sat tight against the manifold, smooth and even, spreading load exactly the way he'd intended. In theory, it would hold. In theory. But theory didn't fly at 27,000 feet. Owens straightened slowly and looked up at Gravel Gertie's wing, black against the pre-dawn sky. Captain Albert Patterson and his crew would trust this aircraft with their lives in a few hours. The 6th Bomb Group needed every bomber airborne. Japan needed them to fail. Owens picked up his clipboard and signed the aircraft off as mission ready. Owens was depending on a trick he'd invented himself, because no one else cared enough to keep these aircraft alive. He climbed onto the wing and moved methodically from engine to engine, flashlight sweeping across metal scarred by heat and vibration. Number 1 engine looked solid. All fittings tight. No oil streaks. No heat cracking around the exhaust flange. Number 2 showed slight oil seepage around the valve covers. Normal for an R-3350. Acceptable. Number 4's exhaust stacks were discolored deep blue and purple, signs of sustained high temperature. Also normal. These stacks had 60 hours on them. They'd be replaced after the mission. Then there was number 3, the engine with the crack. The engine with the wire. At 4:45, his assistant crew chief arrived. Staff Sergeant Bobby Morrison. 22 years old. 3 months on Tinian. Smart, disciplined, by the book, and completely loyal to Owens. Morrison began his walk around with a clipboard, checking fluid levels, tires, control surfaces. When he reached number 3, he stopped. He saw the wire. He looked up at Owens. Owens shook his head once. That was all. Morrison nodded and marked the inspection complete. He didn't question it. Didn't argue. Didn't ask for documentation. That was the danger of being the best crew chief on the field. People trusted you, even when your judgment might kill them. By 6 o'clock, the hardstand came alive. Fuel trucks rolled in. Bomb handlers wrestled incendiaries into the bomb bay. Armorers fed belts of .50 caliber ammunition into remote turrets. Engines coughed and roared across Tinian and as crews prepared for another night over Japan. Owens supervised everything. Every fuel coupling. Every hydraulic line. Every electrical connector. If Gravel Gertie failed on this mission, it wouldn't be because he missed something on the ground. At 9:30, Captain Albert Patterson arrived for his pre-flight. 24 years old. 6 missions completed. Calm, methodical, still young enough to believe the airplane wanted to bring him home. Patterson walked the aircraft with his flight engineer, checking control surfaces and landing gear. He spent several minutes under each engine. When he reached number 3, he stopped. He saw the wire. He stared at it for 10 seconds. Then he moved on without saying a word. Patterson trusted his crew chief. That trust would be tested at 27,000 feet over Japan. At 11:20, the crew climbed aboard. Pilot, co-pilot, flight engineer, navigator, bombardier, radio operator, radar operator. For gunners, 11 men, 53,000 pounds of aircraft, 28,000 pounds of fuel, 20,000 pounds of incendiaries. All of it hanging on 4 engines that had already killed more Americans than Japanese fighters. Owens stood on the hardstand as Patterson started the engines. Number 1 first. The starter whined. The propeller turned. The engine coughed, belched thick black smoke, then caught. Oil pressure climbed. Cylinder head temperatures followed. Normal. Number 2 started clean. Smooth idle. No hesitation. Number 4 took longer. Backfired twice. More smoke. Then it stabilized. 3 engines running. 1 left. Number 3. The cracked manifold. The wire. Patterson hit the starter. The propeller turned once. Twice. 3 times. The engine coughed, then caught. Smoke poured from the exhaust. Thicker than normal. Darker. Owens held his breath. The smoke cleared. Idle stabilized at 1,400 revolutions per minute. Oil pressure climbed. Cylinder head temperatures rose evenly. The wire was holding. Patterson advanced the throttles for run-up. Number 1 ran clean. Number 2 ran clean. Number 3 hesitated, just for a second. Maybe 2. Then it smoothed out. Owens felt his stomach tighten. A hesitation meant something wasn't right. Fuel flow. Ignition. Heat stress. Patterson either didn't notice or chose not to. He throttled back, gave the ground crew a thumbs up. At 11:52, Gravel Gertie taxied toward the runway. Owens watched from the hardstand, eyes locked on the exhaust stacks. Watching for flame. Watching for smoke. Watching for the moment his gamble betrayed him. He saw nothing. Just 4 R-3350s running rough and hot, like every other engine in the Pacific. 12 bombers lined up for takeoff. 30-second intervals. Each aircraft using nearly the entire 8,000-foot runway to claw itself into the air. Gravel Gertie rolled forward. 5th in sequence. Owens stood alone on the coral hardstand as the bomber ahead lifted off. Engine screaming, heat shimmering behind it. In 30 seconds, it would be their turn. And in a few hours, his wire would either hold or burn 11 men alive over Japan. Each bomber clawed its way into the sky, engines screaming, barely clearing the trees at the end of the runway. Overloaded, overweight, overstressed. At 12:07, Gravel Gertie began her takeoff roll. Full throttle. All 4 right R-3350s howled as 101,000 pounds of aluminum, fuel, and fire accelerated across coral and asphalt. 40 miles per hour. 50, 60. The tail lifted. 80 miles per hour. The main wheels were still on the ground. 6,000 feet of runway gone. Patterson pulled back on the yoke. The bomber lifted, barely. She struggled for altitude. 200 feet. 300. The landing gear came up. 400 feet. She was airborne. Climbing. All 4 engines running. Owens stood on the hardstand, eyes locked on the aircraft until Gravel Gertie disappeared into the morning haze. Heading north, toward Japan, toward Osaka, toward 1,500 miles of ocean and enemy territory. 11 men depending on 4 engines, 4 engines depending on his maintenance, and 1 engine depending on a piece of wire. Owens couldn't sleep. He tried. At 1300 hours he lay on his cot, staring at the canvas ceiling of his tent, running the math again and again. Osaka at 1630. Bomb run at 1645. Turn for home at 1700 hours. Back to Tinian around 2130. 8.5 hours. 8.5 hours wondering if the wire was holding. 8.5 hours wondering if he'd just killed 11 men. At 1500 hours, he gave up. He walked back to the hard stand and started preparing for post-flight maintenance. Laid out tools. Checked oil inventory. Counted hydraulic fluid cans. Organized spare parts. Busy work. Anything to keep his mind off number 3 engine. At 1600 hours, the first abort returned. A B-29 from the 40th Squadron. Number 2 engine. Oil pressure dropped to 0 at 12,000 feet. The pilot shut it down and turned back. Smart decision. The bomber landed safely at 1620. The crew climbed out shaken, but alive. Their crew chief looked relieved. Better a failed mission than a burning aircraft. At 1640, a second abort landed. Another 40th Squadron aircraft. Number 4 engine fire at 18,000 feet. The onboard fire suppression system worked. One of the lucky 13%. They dumped their bombs into the ocean and limped home on 3 engines. The fire had damaged the wing structure. That aircraft wouldn't fly again for weeks. 2 bombers aborted. 10 continued to Osaka, including Gravel Gertie. At 1700 hours, Owens walked to the operations tent. Radio operators tracked the formation. The bombers reached Osaka. Position reports came in. Bomb release confirmations. No distress calls. No mayday signals. That was good. At 1730, the formation turned for home. All 10 bombers checked in. All 10 still flying. All 10 headed back to Tinian. Owens felt the tightness in his chest ease, just a little. Gravel Gertie had survived the bombing run. The wire was still holding. But the flight home was when engines usually died. After 6 hours at high power. After heat and vibration had done their damage. After stress fractures became failures. That's when exhaust manifolds split. That's when oil lines ruptured. That's when engines caught fire. At 1900 hours, Owens was back on the hard stand, staring into the darkening sky. The sun dropped into the Pacific. The bombers would return at night. Long missions. Exhausted crews. Failing engines. At 2000 hours, the tower reported radar contact. 80 miles out. All 10 bombers still airborne. Estimated landing time, 21:15. At 2100 hours, Owens saw navigation lights in the distance. Red and green dots moving toward the island. He counted. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. All 10 bombers were coming home, including Gravel Gertie. But coming home wasn't enough. Landing was the last test. And number 3 engine still had 15 more minutes to run. 15 more minutes. 15 more minutes of heat, vibration, and stress on a cracked exhaust manifold. 15 more minutes for the wire to fail. At 2112, the first bomber entered the landing pattern. The tower talked each aircraft down in sequence, 1 every 3 minutes. Standard spacing. No emergency calls. No priority landings. That meant no visible damage. No wounded crews. No fires yet. Gravel Gertie was 6th in the pattern. Owens watched her circle the island at 1,500 feet. Navigation lights steady. No smoke. No flicker of flame. From the ground, she looked perfect. But Owens knew what was hiding under the cowling of number 3 engine. At 2127, Gravel Gertie turned onto final. Gear down. Flaps extended. Airspeed bleeding off. Patterson flew her in smooth and steady. Textbook. 500 feet. 400. 300. The engines throttled back. All 4 still running. All 4 still holding. At 2129, the main gear touched down. Smooth. The nose gear settled. Patterson reversed the propellers and applied brakes. The bomber slowed, turned off at the midfield taxiway, and rolled toward her hard stand. All 4 engines still running. Owens finally allowed himself to breathe. At 2133, Gravel Gertie stopped. Patterson shut the engines down in sequence. Number 4. Number 2. Number 1. Number 3 last. The cracked one. The wired one. It ran 10 seconds after Patterson pulled the mixture to idle cutoff. Coughed twice. Stopped. The propeller windmilled for 5 seconds, then froze. Silence. The crew climbed out, exhausted. 14 hours in the air. 6 over Japan. Incendiaries on target. No losses. They had survived flak. Survived fighters. Survived the flight home. They never knew how close they'd come to burning. Patterson signed the logbook. No mechanical discrepancies reported. All systems normal. He thanked Owens, then walked toward the debriefing tent. The crew followed. Owens waited until the hardstand cleared. Then he climbed up to number 3 engine. He removed the cowling and aimed his flashlight at the exhaust manifold. The crack was longer. 5 inches now. Nearly double what it had been. The wire had compressed under stress. The loops deformed, pulled tight like a noose. They'd held, but barely. Hairline fractures spidered outward from both ends of the crack. Another mission and the manifold would have ruptured. The wire wouldn't have stopped it. 11 men would have died over Japan. Owens unwound the wire, coiled it, and dropped it into his tool bag. He tagged the engine for replacement. The standard fix. The approved fix. 8 hours of downtime. Gravel Gertie would miss the next mission, but she'd fly again. Safely. Owens climbed down and looked across the flight line. 11 other B-29s sat in the dark. He wondered how many had cracks no one had seen. How many crew chiefs were using their own tricks. How many men were betting their lives on unauthorized repairs. The next morning, Owens submitted his maintenance report. Number 3 exhaust manifold cracked. Replacement required. Estimated downtime. 8 hours. Nothing else. No mention of wire. No mention of violated orders. No mention of the 15-hour gamble. But someone noticed. At 1400 hours, a captain from group maintenance walked onto the hardstand. Captain Raymond Pfizer. Engineering officer. MIT graduate. Responsible for keeping 180 B-29s flying. And he was about to ask questions Owens couldn't dodge. Pfizer had been asking about Gravel Gertie for 3 weeks. Not casually. Not out of curiosity. Out of disbelief. Half the B-29 fleet on Tinian was grounded at any given moment. Engines swapped. Cowlings off, scorched nacelles, crews staring at burned magnesium like it was a curse. And yet one aircraft kept flying like it was immune. 65 hours on engines that were supposed to die at 75. 22 missions. 0 aborts. 0 fires. 0 mechanical failures. At 1400 hours, Captain Raymond Pfizer stepped onto the hardstand with a clipboard, a flashlight, and the face of a man who'd stopped trusting luck a long time ago. He crouched under number 3 engine, looked at the manifold, measured the crack. 5 inches. Discolored metal around it. Heat stress, vibration fatigue, the exact signature that preceded ruptures. The exact signature that killed crews. Then he looked up at Owens. How did this airplane fly a 15-hour mission with a crack this size? Owens didn't answer. He just opened his tool bag and held out the wire. Pfizer took it, stared at it for 5 seconds, and then his eyes changed. Not shock. Understanding. He turned the wire in his fingers like it was evidence at a crime scene. Then he looked back at the manifold, and the whole picture snapped into place. The stress point, the heat line, the weld seam. Where the R-3350 always failed. Pfizer nodded once slow. Then he stood up and walked to the next hardstand. He inspected that B-29. Found 2 cracked manifolds, replaced properly. That bomber had aborted its last 3 missions. He walked to a third hardstand. Found 3 cracked manifolds. That bomber had caught fire on takeoff 2 weeks earlier. The crew lived. The airplane didn't. Pfizer didn't stop. He spent the next 6 hours moving across the line, crawling under nacelles, pulling cowling panels, shining a light on every exhaust junction, every seam that glowed blue from heat. By sunset, his clipboard looked like a casualty list. 43 cracked exhaust manifolds. 43 potential catastrophes. 43 engines that could spray flames straight onto fuel lines at altitude. Most of them had been found and fixed the right way. Manifold replacement, 8 hours downtime, missed missions. The planes that didn't get fixed, aborted, burned, or came back on 3 engines with the suppression system empty. Except Gravel Gertie. Because one crew chief had been doing what the manuals didn't allow. At 1800 hours, Pfizer submitted his report to Colonel Samuel Harris, commander of the 6th Bomb Group. The report was blunt. It included photographs of the crack patterns, notes from his inspections, and a section that made every officer in group maintenance sit up straight. Owens's wire reinforcement method. It included calculations, how the wire redistributed stress across the cracked section, how it stabilized the seam long enough to survive a mission, how it bought hours the manuals couldn't. And it ended with a recommendation that would have been unthinkable anywhere but a war zone. Authorize it. Immediately. At 2000 hours, Owens stood inside the operations tent facing 12 officers. Maintenance officers. Engineering officers. Men whose job was to keep 180 bombers alive. And now they wanted to know why he'd been flying one of them with an unauthorized fix that violated every technical order on the island. One officer asked it like an accusation. Why didn't you ground the aircraft? Another asked it like a threat. Why didn't you report these cracks through proper channels? A third said what everyone was thinking. You understand you were betting 11 lives on a piece of wire. Owens didn't flinch. He laid the wire on the table. Then he explained. He explained the 8-hour replacement window, the mission schedule, the reality of the R-3350, the fact that if they grounded every aircraft that needed the perfect fix, they'd launch half the bombers, and the war would drag on month after month while Japan stayed standing. He explained that his job wasn't to protect regulations. It was to protect crews, and to keep bombers in the air long enough to finish the war. The tent went quiet. Some of the officers frowned. Some nodded. Every one of them understood the arithmetic. No one in that room had a better answer. At 2100 hours, Colonel Harris made the decision. Owens's wire reinforcement method was approved. Emergency use only. Strict conditions. Crack less than 4 inches. Within 6 hours of scheduled launch. Replacement impossible. Signed off by the crew chief and the aircraft commander. Not official doctrine. Not in the manual. But authorized. We didn't wait for manuals. Over the next 4 months, crew chiefs across the 6th Bomb Group used Owens's wire trick 87 times. 87 cracked manifolds reinforced. 87 missions flown that would have been canceled. 87 aircraft that didn't catch fire. 0 failures. 0 engine fires. 0 casualties from manifold ruptures. And Gravel Gertie kept going. She flew 63 combat missions before the war ended. Tokyo, Nagoya, Osaka, Kobe, Yokohama. 420 tons of incendiaries dropped. Flak damage 12 times. Fighter attacks 6 times. Never aborted. Never burned. Never lost an engine. The only B-29 in the 6th Bomb Group with a perfect operational record. Owens maintained her through every mission. Every morning at 4 o'clock, 2 hours before anyone else, he performed the same ritual. Torque wrench, flashlight, heat stains, pressure lines, fittings, spark plugs, the obsessive routine that looked like paranoia until you counted how many crews didn't come back. In June 1945, Owens received a citation for meritorious service. The wording was polite, bureaucratic. It said he supervised maintenance under adverse conditions, solving new problems never before faced. It never mentioned the wire. It never mentioned the 5-inch crack. It never mentioned that, on one night over Osaka, 11 men came home alive because a crew chief broke the rules and was right. The citation said he directed ground servicing so effectively that his aircraft completed missions without mechanical malfunction requiring early return. It said he displayed indefatigable zeal. It said he devoted exceptionally long hours to keep his bomber operational, sometimes repairing battle damage from one raid while simultaneously preparing the aircraft for the next. It was clean language. Safe language. The kind that fit neatly into personnel files. It didn't mention the wire. It didn't mention the unauthorized repairs. It didn't mention the nights he bet 11 lives against a clock, a crack, and an engine that wanted to burn. Official records never did. But the men who flew Gravel Gertie knew. Captain Albert Patterson knew. Every man in that crew knew. They knew they came home because one crew chief cared more about keeping them alive than following regulations written thousands of miles away by men who never stood under a glowing engine at 3 in the morning. The war ended on August 15, 1945. Gravel Gertie was scheduled to fly that day. Her bombs were loaded. Her fuel tanks full. Her crew briefed. The mission was canceled 4 hours before takeoff. Japan had surrendered. The B-29 program was declared a success. For years of development, 3 years of production, 18 months of operations, Nearly 3,900 aircraft built. The most expensive weapons system of the war aside from the atomic bomb. History credited engineering, design, industrial might. It rarely credited the men who kept those machines from killing their own crews. Because the truth was uncomfortable. The B-29 worked not because it was reliable, but because crew chiefs like William Owens refused to let unreliable machines decide who lived and who burned. In October 1945, Gravel Gertie flew back to the United States. In 1946, she was scrapped, cut apart, melted down, turned into refrigerators, automobiles, anonymous sheets of post-war steel. The B-29 that never failed vanished without a museum, without a plaque, without a monument, reduced to a serial number buried in maintenance logs. William Owens went home to Pennsylvania. He worked for Eastern Airlines for 30 years. Passenger aircraft, civilian schedules, no bombs, no fires. He never talked about the war, never mentioned his citation, never explained to his family why he inspected every aircraft 3 times before signing it off, why he trusted his hands more than manuals, why he never believed a machine was safe just because the paperwork said it was. His daughter didn't learn about Gravel Gertie until after he died in 1987. The wire trick was never officially adopted. It never appeared in technical manuals. But it didn't disappear. Crew chiefs remembered. Korea, Vietnam, every war where aircraft flew with inadequate parts and impossible schedules. It was passed quietly, crew chief to crew chief. An unauthorized field modification. A piece of wire. A reminder that sometimes the difference between life and death isn't engineering brilliance or official doctrine. It's one exhausted mechanic, alone under an engine before dawn, deciding that getting people home alive matters more than following the rules.